Welcome to the Planning and Analytics Overview from some of the latest CCH Tagetik developments and capabilities. We're going to spend a quick 45 minutes together today, live in the product, to take a look at how Tagetik can help with that long-range strategic plan, or even build up on the annual budget, or even on the reforecasting side of things. So we'll take a deep dive look from an end user's point of view of how different users can work on different forward-looking processes. And we're going to wrap all of that around with some of the reporting capabilities that Tagetik comes with out of the box, whether it's financial, operational, or even data visualization or PowerPoint reporting in Tagetik. Let's go ahead and take a quick look right away. What we're taking a look at here is just one of the two main areas our end users typically interact with the application. And this area is what we call the CCH Tagetik web front end. And all I have to do to access that is simply log in through any web browser that supports HTML5 technology. In this case, I am using Google Chrome, but we're web browser agnostic from an HTML perspective. And the same thing also will apply to some of your mobile devices like the iPads and the Surfaces. So what we're taking a look at here is Tagetik's zero footprint web front end that doesn't require any additional add-ins or custom IT settings. It's actually a plug-and-play web front end that a lot of our users typically enjoy. And we'll get to it in just 1 second. But Tagetik also does come with the Office suite, whether it's Excel, Word, or PowerPoint. Tagetik users will actually be able to leverage native Word, Excel, or PowerPoint functionality, and go along with that, some Tagetik functionality to sit on top. So we'll see some of that in action later on in today's presentation as well. But for the time being, we're going to actually stay focused on the web front end. And the journey off of the web front end really starts off of my landing page. And the landing page is just one example. It's actually the first example we're seeing of how CCH Tagetik can essentially make the end user experience more enjoyable and, above all, much easier and more intuitive. As you can see, I've logged in with my Rob user, and I can have quick and easy access to all of the core capabilities that Tagetik has to offer that's relevant to myself as the Rob user in this case. Whereas other users that log in and only have to run a couple reports once a month, their homepage adapts to their layout and gives them quick access to all the core capabilities they need in the application. So even though Tagetik's a full financial comprehensive platform that actually has a lot of functionality beyond just the simple annual budgets, we still make it extremely easy to navigate. And one good example is, of course, this landing page. And just to give you a quick example of the user experience from even an executive's perspective, somebody that wants to work on a long-range strategic plan, that first step in Tagetik's ideal planning methodology world, we can access that right away from a homepage tile such as the strategic plan. Now, really quickly, before I jump into that, just to highlight a little bit of Tagetik's ideal approach when it comes to the entire planning process, we typically stress that the focus doesn't have to just be on the simple P&L budget expenses. Actually, in Tagetik, we really recommend starting things off with a high-level 3 to 5 year long-range plan where different thresholds or different targets can be set, sometimes by executive users in a much more driver-based initiative planning type of methodology. And then we kick off the annual budget process where maybe we have a decentralized approach where lots of department owners contribute to the same budget, trying to build up to those targets on the strategic planning side of things. And as many folks know and actually see in real life, as soon as that annual budget is completed, or not even after it's been finalized, it's already outdated. So it's extremely important to constantly update our forward-looking statements by reforecasting. Whether it's on a quarterly basis or even on a rolling monthly basis, for instance, Tagetik can also help with that. So we can complete the 360 view when it comes to the different planning methodologies. And we'll also touch a little bit on how Tagetik can actually extend the game beyond just P&L planning and really show the impact on projected balance sheet and projected cash flow as well, to have that holistic approach from a financial statements perspective as well. To take a quick look at strategic planning, all I have to do is click. And right away, I'll land on an example of a little executive strategy cockpit using one of Tagetik's web forms. And the idea here was to tailor an experience geared towards the executive audience that typically likes to have a longer range time horizon. And in this case, we can see that we're planning across multiple years in Tagetik and not just in 1 year. And also the experience is much more modeling based, much more driver based, where I can start mixing and matching different initiatives. And I can say things like, hey, let me take a look at different assumptions like maybe my macroeconomics, for example, and let me start playing around with those. And let me change my year 1 assumptions to go from baseline to perhaps maybe a high scenario. So I can start modeling right away on the fly by using simple drop-down lists and playing with different baseline scenarios across multiple years. And instantly I can see charts and graphs update and even have a visibility into my impact on earnings right away. And as you'll notice, this long-range plan is done at an extremely aggregated level where maybe I'm working for the entire USA region. And then I'm just going to push these targets down to the individual states and offices, for instance. Now, from an executive's perspective, some folks that maybe want to play with different assumptions or manage these assumptions, we actually have sections down below that allow them to start playing with the drivers. And whether it's the drivers related to macroeconomics or revenue control or any other sort of drivers like seasonality splits, it's extremely easy for executives to start doing some modeling and maybe changing some different assumptions like changing direct channels and maybe working on their Boost Local Sales initiative under year 1 and start saying things like, you know what, there's going to be actually a 55% focus on direct channel marketing, for instance, so we're expecting that to have some impact on the local sales based on our driver assumptions. So let me bump that up to 55%. And actually, since we're playing with different revenue assumptions, different sales assumptions, what I want to do is actually go ahead and make those adjustments right away for my plan, even in year 1. So I already see that we're boosting local sales in year 2, but let me do some modeling and let me change it up a little bit in year 1. And rather than doing the inclusion of distributions, maybe we want to boost local sales in year 1 as well. And again, instantly, the different KPI thresholds or different targets will update right away, providing us visibility into how the long-range strategic plan will have an impact on certain KPIs or certain strategy ratings. So from an executive's perspective, this can all, of course, be done on the iPad as well, but it's meant to be a high-level planning capabilities, much more initiative-based with a lot of mixing and matching, and above all, including countless drivers to come up with that plan as well. So from a long-range perspective, just an example here, but it's one idea of how executives can actually use CCH Tagetik from a much heavier modeling perspective. But then when it comes to the annual budget process in Tagetik, what I can actually do as an end user is, again, right from my homepage, jump into the Tagetik workflow capabilities. And here right away, I can see examples of some of Tagetik's process cockpit capabilities. And for those folks not familiar with some of the Tagetik terminology, like what is a process simply means a business cycle. And the business cycle in this case that we want to break down into workflow and monitor certain steps is the annual budget, but this functionality comes along with all of the business cycles in Tagetik, whether it's the month-end close, the financial consolidations, or in this case, the annual budget. And what we're taking a look at here is a great one-stop shop for managers or budget owners to understand how everybody's doing in the overall process. As you can see on my left, any process in Tagetik can be broken down into multiple steps. We can have one step to keep it easy, or we can go as granular as needed. But what's important is for each and every single one of these different steps, I have perfect visibility into all of those entities that have not yet started working on their data, or maybe those that are in progress, or even those that are in submission or have actually already submitted their data. Since we just kicked off the budget, it kind of makes sense that there's not too much activity going on, but I do see that there's 6% of my entities are actually started on the payroll planning process. So you know what? Let me drill down. Let me one-click drill into my interactive graph, and I can see right away that entity that's actually gone ahead and already started working on HR planning. So I can see that detail right away from my process cockpit. Really important for those managers that really want a pulse of any business cycle, like the annual budget in this case. But those folks, those end users that maybe aren't responsible for managing the process. Think about the end user that's responsible just for entering the expense plan for New York. Well, that user probably isn't interested in all this other detail. So what Tagetik's going to do is actually navigate them to the expense plan step just for their one entity, which in this case is New York, and provide a graphical view to let the end users understand what they need to accomplish. So just like before, we saw that one-stop shop for the budget managers, where they have everything they need at their fingertips. Think about this from the end user's point of view. This is their one-stop shop, because as an end user, I have perfect visibility into my current status, my deadline, and how much time I have left. So I understand where I'm at and how much time I have left to complete everything. And I can quickly swap between graphical views and simple laundry list of activities, so I can understand exactly step by step what I need to accomplish before I can submit my data for approval. Now, no matter the view that I take a look at here, what's important is not only does Tagetik show us what needs to get done, but it also allows us to use this as a launching pad to go get those activities done. I'll give you an example. If we need to focus on the annual budget to take a look at some of the capabilities Tagetik has to offer, what we can do is start working on our operating expenses. And here, as an end user, I'm really prompted with my first choice I have to make. Do I want to work on operating expenses in the web, or do I want to work in Excel? Thankfully, the choice is really just a matter of preference, because in Tagetik, we build reports and data entry templates once, and then we automatically deploy them to the web. So the same exact data entry templates for entering operating expenses is available both on the web and in Excel. By the way, Tagetik is going to launch the first example of a data entry template for the budget for us. And in this case, we're looking at a simple expense plan that I've broken down into multiple sections. One dedicated to HR expenses or employee costs that's actually showing up in white cells. So that just means that that information is locked in Tagetik. But of course, I can analyze that data, I can drill down, I can do ad hoc analysis, but I cannot change that information here. I have a section in yellow dedicated to collecting some of my fixed operating expenses, which we'll get to in 1 second. And then I also have a section dedicated to other expenses, whether they're allocated costs that are non-controllable but do have an impact on my department, or whether they're more driver-based costs like travel or marketing that maybe are coming from more detailed plans that we'll also see in just a couple of minutes here. But main reason why we came here to this form in the first place was to show and highlight the end user experience from a simple data collection perspective. And I can focus on that in my yellow section, because yellow in Tagetik simply means that that information is free to go ahead and be edited right on the fly. So just by simply using my keyboard, for instance, I can have a very similar experience to Excel in the sense that it's as easy as Excel. If I can enter a number in Excel, I can enter one in Tagetik. I can also do similar copies and pastes, for example, or drag and drops just by dragging my rows over across the columns. So from a pure ease of use perspective, for those users that don't want to learn a new tool or maybe want to have a very minimal learning curve, Tagetik can be as easy as just using the keyboard to enter some data. And not only that, but even for some folks that want to start being a little bit more advanced. Maybe they don't want to plan a zero-based budget, for instance. Maybe we want to make our phone and internet expenses driven off of our total HR costs. Well, we can start building formulas in Tagetik right away just by pointing and clicking. I can start my formula by saying, hey, you know what? My phone and internet costs in January are going to equal my total HR costs divided by 1,000, for instance. And you'll notice the way I'm creating that formula is the exact Excel syntax that you would use in Microsoft Excel, because in Tagetik we have brought over all of the Excel syntax to the web. So you don't have to learn proprietary formula language to start creating driver-based formulas. And just like in Excel, if we drag and drop, for instance, January costs all the way through March, Tagetik's going to update those formulas right away. And even if I hit on F2, it'll show me that formula, how it was built, and it'll also point directly to any drivers or any calculations that I'm using. So even for those users that want to start being a little bit more advanced and maybe leveraging driver-based formulas, still the learning curve is practically zero, because we're using the same formula language both in Excel and on the web. Now, a lot of times our customers and our end users, what they really enjoy is the ease of use, but then they want things faster or potentially even more accurate as well. So not only does Tagetik make it extremely easy, but we provide functionality to help be a little bit more sophisticated as well. For instance, if I want to start using my actuals and analyze those and get a little bit more insight in terms of how my utilities were broken down by specific vendors, for instance, or providers, what I can actually do is go ahead and expand my section up top and provide a little bit more details when it comes to maybe my actuals, for instance. And I can see full year actuals right away for some of my costs like utilities. And I can see that $30,000 from last year and compare that to my annual budget total of $44,000, which of course will give me a variance of about $13,000 here. But what if? What if I actually wanted to get a little bit more detail beyond this high level $30,000? Well, what I can do is actually go directly into the transactions just by leveraging simple analysis capabilities in Tagetik called drill through. And what drill through can do, either in real time or through a staging area, is break down an aggregated value, such as my $30,000 in cost for utilities, and start breaking those down by individual transactions. And each one of these transactions can come with a number of attributes or fields coming directly from your source systems. Even concepts like local GL accounts that were then mapped to parent accounts. And users can have that visibility. So even if they're working on standardized corporate chart of accounts, they can always drill back to the details and see how their local GLs make up those amounts. So just one example of how CCH Tagetik can actually empower some of our end users to be a little bit more independent and give them access to data such as transactional details without having them being bogged down by the accounting department or having to go to other solutions or other software. Essentially, everything that they'll need is going to be in one area on the expense plan. And not only that, but potentially what I can even do here is not just make it a little bit more accurate on the actual side, but what we can also start doing is things like, hey, end users that don't want to go month by month and account by account entering their data. They want to start planning maybe at the aggregated level and have Tagetik build up the details. For those users that want to be even more advanced and especially more rapid data collection, what we can enable is spreading. And spreading in Tagetik essentially creates more flexibility on any of the data entry templates. And by flexibility, what I mean is I'm no longer restricted to coming up with a budget from a bottoms-up perspective. I can actually start working on my auditing expenses for the entire year and maybe plan for them to be $40,000 for the entire year. And just by hitting on enter, what Tagetik will do is actually spread this $40,000 down to the individual months based on a specific spreading methodology. And in that spreading methodology really dictates how much value goes into January versus February. And in this case, my spreading pattern that I selected was proportional, but we do come with a number of options out of the box, like flat or seasonal spreads to mimic the weeks of quarters, or one more, even more advanced spreading methodology is this one called based on scenario. Again, just to introduce another little bit of terminology in Tagetik, a scenario is simply a bucket of data. And one common bucket of data that all of our customers have is prior year actuals. So what we're talking about is enabling end users to come in and plan at the yearly level and have Tagetik come up with the monthly inputs based on the trends, based on the patterns already existing in our actuals. So this really is a great way of tracking any sort of seasonality or any spikes in sales, or in this case, any sort of spikes in expenses. And just as we always say in Tagetik, we can always go that next level. In Tagetik, spreading isn't just limited to going from the total yearly view down to the individual months. I can actually do things like spread for my entire operating expense value in February and have Tagetik push the details back down to the individual GL accounts. Or I can even do things like run a high-level triangular allocation where I actually plan for my entire department's cost of $214,000 for all of the fixed expenses for the entire year, and then Tagetik can break down the details all the way back down to the most granular level. So again, for those users that want to enter data a little bit quicker, with just a few clicks, spreading is a great option to make that data collection a bit more efficient. And again, here, just to highlight a little bit, especially whenever we have multiple users working on the same budget at the same time, we want some collaboration. So Tagetik does provide the ability to collaborate with comments, whether they're row comments or footers or headers, for instance, that are extremely visual, like I see my external training, so you know what, I need to see some additional details. Or what we can actually do is start leveraging Tagetik's cell annotation capabilities. And by that, what I'm talking about is actually adding a comment that follows this $1,000 in postage costs everywhere in the application. And I can do that just by simply hitting on the comment field and adding one of my comments right away on the fly with simple data entry, and even inserting specific attachments. Like in this case, maybe an Excel file or a screenshot or a PowerPoint Word doc or anything like that. And here I can give it a quick little title, and as soon as I hit on save, Tagetik's going to give me visibility into that comment right away through a familiar triangle indicator, much like you would see in Excel. And simply by hovering over that cell, I can see any users and their comments or any back and forth dialogue. If a manager needs to talk with some of the contributing users, they can actually trap the dialogue. And of course, any attachments attached to that document can be downloaded as well right away from the same window. But again, the point here and the main value to take away is that as an end user, I can provide supporting documents or supporting information and attach it directly to numbers. Like in this case, my $1,000 in postage expenses, and that comment's going to follow this number everywhere it's pulled in reports. So the significance there is being able to drill down from high-level manager reports where they're looking at high spikes and variance, and they can pull up these comments and supporting details right away without having to pick up the phone and call the New York budget owner and ask them what their justification was for that spike in postage costs. So just another way to introduce a little bit more collaboration in the Tagetik world. But not only is it around ease of use and collaboration, but we also stress this concept of flexibility. We saw a little bit of the flexibility in terms of how you can plan in Tagetik bottoms up, driver-based, zero-based, tops down, middles up, for instance. But what about flexibility in terms of, what if I want to work on version 1 of my budget, for instance? Or what if I want to work on next year's budget? I want to start preceding that, for instance. So what I can start doing is actually adding additional time periods right on the fly through a simple plus button. In fact, just by clicking on my plus and adding the 2019 budget, my operating expense form is going to update and dynamically expand right away, and it's going to allow me to do things like start preceding my 2019 budget based off of last year's actuals with even a little bit of a bump, like a 12% bump, for instance. So Tagetik's going to plan that 2019 outer year budget of $38,000 at the total level, and then of course it can split it back down to the months based on any sort of splitting methodology. But the concept here is flexibility from a time perspective and even from a features functions perspective. And just to cap things off, because in Tagetik it's not just simple fixed expense planning, for instance, we can also start planning a little bit below this GL level when it comes to concepts like travel planning or marketing planning, for instance. So just by simply clicking on my travel budget, Tagetik can direct me right away to a detailed travel budget form where I can start using additional drivers and I can start planning for all of my travel expenses at a much more granular level. And right away you'll notice that we introduced this concept of different drivers, such as airfare or lodging drivers, and to go along with that theme of flexibility, the ability to add ad hoc drivers right on the fly through the quick use of a simple plus button. And right away I can start leveraging these different drivers to come up with a plan. So if I wanted to, a new driver, I can quickly hit on the plus button and Tagetik will expand and allow me to enter a new driver like cost per mile, for instance, and I can enter that as 55 cents per mile. And just by simply adding that driver, I now have a new driver that I can leverage on my trip planning. So rather than having my other travel expense for trip 2 be a simple dollar value where I enter $600, what I can say is, you know what, let me turn this type of expense from a dollar value into a calculation. And by doing that, I'm now free to start leveraging external drivers, such as that cost per mile, and come up with a plan. And I can say things like, you know what, I'm expecting to travel about 1,500 miles, 15,000 miles, and I know that that each mile is going to cost about 55 cents per mile. So I can start building my driver-based formulas, point and click to different drivers that we used, hit on enter, and Tagetik will show me the values right away and update my plan accordingly. And of course, the charts and the graphs will go along with that theme. So even for those folks that want to use ad hoc drivers that maybe aren't in the system, we can go ahead and allow them the flexibility to do that right on the fly. And just to quickly close things off with the marketing side of things, I can quickly navigate over to the right-hand side where I can actually start adding new initiatives like my North American User Conference push, for instance, and start assigning those to specific groups of initiatives like events and conferences in this case, or digital marketing when it comes to the CFO user group, for instance. And not only can I assign these different marketing plans to specific initiatives, if I want to time those up with specific product launches or assign them to existing products, I can do that through a simple drop-down list where users can select very easily which product or which region applies to this particular marketing initiative. And of course, I can start assigning specific days. So if this needs to start on not April, but maybe February 6th, for instance, simple calendar logic allows me to pinpoint the exact day. I can say that it's going to be about a 6-month project and it's going to cost about $8,000. And Tagetik's going to update the plan instantaneously. And of course, if I go to my highlight on my expense plan, I'm expecting all of the marketing data to flow in instantly as well. So a few different ways that end users can work on the annual budget side of things. But a couple key points is for those folks that want an easy and simple, we can do that. But we still need to accommodate those folks that want to go to the next level and start using some of the built-in capabilities of Tagetik, like the drill through or the comments or the ability to model new scenarios or outer years of the budget right on the fly, or even working on a travel detailed plan where we plan by trips and even assign employees to those trips. So again, we can start scaling up these different functionality pieces dependent on the user. So in this case, we've taken a look really quickly at some of the strategic planning capabilities of Tagetik, and we've even taken a look at some of the planning capabilities of Tagetik. So what I can do now is work on the forecast, but you know what? Before we work on the forecast, I want to show a quick example of how the data flows in Tagetik right away through just a simple output report. So what I can do is actually navigate to my form gallery over on the left, and I can quickly go into my reporting folder where I have my favorite report right away. And I can say that I'm going to run this report for my 2018 budget just by simply selecting it through a drop-down list. It's going to launch that report right away. And just to give a little bit more real estate, I'll go ahead and close that panel. And what we're really seeing is just an example, again, but it's our first example of an output report in Tagetik. So again, just like templates, we also build these directly in Excel once and automatically deploy them anywhere. So like in this case, the web front end. And as you can see, this is a report book made up of a couple different reports, my KPI dashboard, and then some of my financial statements like the P&L and balance sheet on the following tabs as well. Now, when it comes to KPI reporting, as you can see, Tagetik can be a little bit more operational, a little bit more analytical, where we include charts and graphs. Of course, everything's meant to be interactive, so if I want to just focus on my employee costs compared to my variable expenses, it's extremely easy, it's extremely intuitive. I can take a look at different KPIs on a quarterly time horizon over in my right-hand section, and I can even analyze FTE or HR information over on the section to the right. So we're taking a look at a lot of financial and statistical KPI types of data. So in Tagetik, we are extremely flexible on the reporting side. Pulling in many different types of data. And of course, everything's meant to be interactive. Everything's meant to be drillable. So if I want to maybe break down this 66 FTE in North America, and I want to see, for instance, how that's broken down by US and Canada, all I have to do is go to my analysis capabilities and explore my data by cell. And as soon as I click on that, Tagetik's going to take us to the operational grid where we can break down that 66 all the way to the lowest level of regions such as New York, Chicago, and LA. So extremely easy to navigate and get a little bit more insight as well. When it comes to some of the financial reporting in Tagetik, we do support the basics like the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. But as you can see, the basics don't necessarily have to be super standard either. Of course, we can do the easy stuff like reporting lines on the rows and my budget compared to my actuals on the columns with some dollar and percentage variance. That's the standard stuff that you would expect from any CPM solution. We can do it as well. But in Tagetik, we always potentially like to have the ability to go to that next level. And in this case, you can see that we can still provide some analytics capabilities to the right-hand side, where maybe I take a look at my gross margin by product families or my operating cost breakdown. But even more importantly, from an interactive perspective, I can start using these charts and graphs, and I can say, maybe I want to compare my software revenue to my hardware revenue. So through simple drop-down lists and point and click, users will be able to update and interact with their different charts, and in this case, see the ratios between software and hardware and understand if there's any patterns going on at a monthly level, even if we're running a P&L at an annual level. So again, a little bit more additional insight and detail for those users that actually want it. Quickly transitioning over to the balance sheet side of things, just to highlight again some of the capabilities. Of course, we can report on the balance sheet side, but when it comes to the actuals, we do go the next level as well by providing transaction details, just like we saw in the OPEX template. But in this case, we're actually going to see that information right away in the same exact report. So just by simply clicking drill through, I can see those details show up to the right-hand side of my screen right away, pulling in information coming from an AR aging subsystem, for instance, or some other source system where I can pull in additional attributes, invoice dates, supplier information, and even see a cost breakdown by percentage of each transaction. So just a little flavor there of pulling in, again, additional details into Tagetik without having to go anywhere else. So streamlining the reporting process by enabling users to have everything they need right at their fingertips. And of course, Tagetik can even help on the cash flow output side of things, whether it's direct or indirect. But I think the value that Tagetik brings here on the cash flow side of things is not just how we can actually report on the results, but it's also how we get there. So in Tagetik, there is a cash flow engine that essentially can read off of the projected P&L and start transforming and projecting the impact on the working capital on the balance sheet side of things, and then from a revenue perspective, the cash coming in on a cash flow side of things. So if I want to access that cash flow engine as an end user, and I want to see how my software maybe is going to model and turn into cash, what I can do is actually go into the cash flow planning engine of Tagetik from the end user point of view. And right away, we can see, for instance, my projected P&L on a monthly basis. So here's my software revenue that I'm anticipating for the entire year. And I can also see the cash impact on a monthly basis here based on specific rules. And actually, those specific rules, as an end user, I can start modeling with and start playing with in my own sandbox. So we see that originally, from Global Assumptions, there was a net 30 collection rule, essentially saying that as we bill our customers, they're going to actually pay the net about 30 days later. And we overrode that to be 45. But let's say I want to change that to 60. I can simply use a drop-down list and refresh my results. And Tagetik's going to start calculating those values right away in double-entry logic at a total software revenue level for all of my products and all of my customers. And right away, we can see that the projected revenue that we were planning on in January for about 1.3 million, it's actually turning into cash about 60 days later. And of course, since we're doing net 60, we're anticipating 100% collection from our customers, but there is a lot of capabilities here when it comes to cash flow management, whether it's planning for bad debt, whether it's actually coming up with different global assumptions at an individual product or regional level. There's a lot that we can actually do here, but again, the key is if we want to create an easy modeling experience for users to understand the cash impact based on their projected P&L, it can also be done intuitively by simple business owners without any IT reliance. So from a reporting perspective, just a quick example here of some of the capabilities, but there are additional features that we'll get into in just a second as well. Like, for instance, the ability to have dashboards right away. So from a more analytics-based perspective or from a data visualization perspective, Tagetik can also start helping folks see and visualize the numbers, whether it's information coming from the HR model or maybe some sales information or my operating costs, for instance. We can start using these native Tagetik dashboards to visualize the data and start interacting with the data right away. So if I want to focus my analysis on the HR side of things and I want to start drilling down and going from all of my US entities to just New York, for instance, it's a couple clicks away, Everything's going to update in real time, and I can start zooming in on my analysis, all while working on my iPad or on my Surface on a mobile device, for instance. And actually what I can see down below is my costing by different departments broken down by different expense accounts. And I see that my green wages and salary is the main expense account for all of my different HR departmental costs. So you know what? Let me exclude that out of my view, and let me get rid of bonus as well, and let me just start analyzing the tax and the fringe benefit costs to understand where we're spending the most. And here I can see that maybe FICA is one of the main culprits in this case. So I can use this dashboard to do some heavy analysis right away with just a couple clicks. But again, this concept of Tagetik always going one step further is also pervasive in these dashboards. And I'll give you an example of that. Just by clicking on the pivot icon, Tagetik will actually take that data that I was just looking at in an in a chart, and it's actually going to throw it into an in-memory operational grid where I can start slicing and dicing. I can drag my entities to the columns, and Tagetik's going to start breaking down that data with additional detail. And you know what? If I want to maybe add my accounts over to the rows and bring my cost centers up to the columns, as fast as I can slice and dice is as fast as my report's going to change structure here. Even maybe adjusting my entities and saying, you know what, let's just focus on Chicago, for instance, and let me do some analysis there. And since I'm exploring the data, but I'm still working on dashboarding, Tagetik also supports the concept of heat maps or bar charts, for instance, to allow us to actually start visualizing the data and seeing how that's broken down. And we can see right away that the majority of our HR costs are sitting on the New York accounting department. So a couple of different options here when it comes to a little bit more data visualization or dashboarding. But again, the key here is everything is owned by business users. Even creating these dashboards from scratch doesn't require IT in this case. It really requires business users understanding what types of charts and graphs they want to use to visualize their data. So we've seen some examples of financial and operational reporting. We saw a quick example of a dashboard. To quickly round off that fourth type of reporting in Tagetik before we jump over to the forecast side of things and call it a day, Tagetik does also support the ability to report in both Word and in PowerPoint. We call it Collaborative Office, and just like in Excel, we support 100% of the functionality both in Word and in PowerPoint. So I'm actually going to log in directly to PowerPoint to access the Tagetik application. So auditability, user security, centralized document management all applies here. So even though I'm working in PowerPoint, I'm not saving anything in PowerPoint. I'm merely using PowerPoint to interact with the Tagetik application. And my first level of interaction is actually just by drilling in and seeing all of the examples of different PowerPoint templates that I can start working on. Because in Tagetik, we'll actually create your annual board book presentation template once. But then to actually create live working versions, we'll actually use the roll forward capabilities to come up with a 2017 presentation or a 2018 January presentation. So we build one template and the roll forward automatically publishes newer or more recent versions. And actually, each one of these working documents, if I expand on the plus button, can be further broken down into specific sections or chapters or pages. And this is another way Tagetik introduces some serious collaboration, because what we're talking about is having multiple users work on the same document at the same time without having to pass back and forth multiple versions or without getting those typical messages, hey, Rob, you can't go into this PowerPoint because Alessio is working on his and he forgot to save and close out the document. So you have to wait for him to finish before you can go in. So actually we get around that and we can introduce a little bit more efficiency by dividing and conquering. And of course, whenever we have decentralized approaches or whenever we have multiple people working together, we want some visibility into, for instance, how we're doing from an overall document perspective. What's my status? Well, here I can see right away 71% of my document is still a work in progress, for instance. Or, excuse me, from a task perspective, as an end user, what do I have to work on when it comes to my tasks? I can see those right away, and I can see my specific due dates and even the next action item. So workflow capabilities even in PowerPoint or in Word. But when it actually comes time to working on the document, you'll notice that we're not working in any sort of admin type of environment. We're not working with any coding. What we're doing is actually just leveraging the familiar PowerPoint interface to provide a familiar workspace for our financial users. In fact, if they want to make any updates to the verbiage, for instance, or if they want to maybe add new slides right on the fly, the effort is exactly the same as in PowerPoint. The clicks are the same, the functionality is the same. So again, it's one way we minimize that learning curve and really get the end user buy-in. And right away, as you can see on the North American Detailed Financials PowerPoint deck, we're actually including a lot of different information in this report. A lot of text, some financial operating budgets, some cash flow information, headcount information. So a lot of financial, statistical, and narrative information is flowing into this document. But how is it getting here? Well, one way that we get a lot of this information is through the dynamic objects feature of Tagetik. So essentially what we're talking about, everything in yellow, including this monthly outlook in the bottom left, is a dynamic object in Tagetik that will update right away as the plans change or as the numbers change or as we roll forward from one version to the other. So for instance, I know that we were originally planning for 6 headcount, but you know what, maybe it's 0 for instance. So what I can do is actually update that right away, and Tagetik's going to let me know if there's any changes. And what it's telling me here is actually, hey Rob, somebody actually manually overrode this number to be 6, but I'm reading 0 off the database. Do you want me to go ahead and update that? Yes, please. Absolutely. So let me go ahead and hit on OK, and Tagetik's going to pull in the most recent value coming from the database. Now, of course, we can automate this as well, so you don't have to click on update on every single number, but it's just to show you that what we're doing here is not copying and pasting, not hard coding any values. We're actually providing live dynamic links. And this dynamic link isn't just for simple data points like 0 headcount. It can also be for shared paragraphs or footers or headers. It could be entire tables in the form of an operating budget where I'm comparing 2018 to 2017 actuals, or even things like a 23% increase, for instance. So objects come in many different shapes and sizes, and they can also come from many different areas. For instance, objects can come from other documents. Objects can come, of course, directly from Tagetik's database, or for those customers that are looking for a less invasive approach, we can actually pull in documents right away from their offline Excel attachments. And we can add areas as tables or as charts or as images and still get the benefits of collaboration, still get the benefits of roll forward and auditability and all of that. It's just that the data source is coming from somewhere else. And again, here we're just scratching the surface in terms of some of the collaborative office capabilities, but there is even a ton in terms of data diagnostics and validations. Hey, what happens if someone changes this number? Let me track those changes. Or let me create a snapshot of this document so I can compare it maybe in a week and compare the different changes in verbiage. Or what about formatting? Tagetik also does provide the ability to create formatting rules, such as all of the text needs to be in size 18 font, for instance. And Tagetik can actually alert users whenever some of the contributing folks down in the fields start changing corporate styles. So this is just another way we can enable our financial analysts to spend less time on formatting the numbers and more time on actually analyzing the numbers. So what I'll do really quickly, jump back to the web front end, where we want to take a look at the last planning methodology in Tagetik, which is really working on the forecast side of things. So Tagetik does have built-in forecast modeling capabilities, and just by clicking on some of my forecast models, I can see some of the options available to me, like detailed monthly annual forecast, or maybe doing some rolling forecast at an aggregated level, using a 3-month rolling average, for instance. So Tagetik does support the basics when it comes to forecasting, but the built-in engine can also allow us to create rolling forecasts that we update every month, and more importantly, we can even aggregate and roll these forecasts up to a higher level to allow for a simpler forecasting process. And actually, if I want to even run this forecast right away, it's as easy as clicking on the run icon, and that's going to kick off the data processing. And to view the actual results, I can jump into my update forecast. And here's just a simple data entry template where we can actually view our monthly rolling forecast for the March forecast in this case, my 2018 March forecast. And what you'll notice right away, a couple things, I'm at an aggregated level. I'm not taking a look at all of my HR expenses, I'm just looking at total compensation. And even more to the point, you'll notice that my first 3 months, January through March, are all in white for the actuals and, of course, for the forecast. Because in this case, Tagetik automatically locked down that the first 3 months, since the first 3 months of our forecast are, of course, based on actuals. And even if we wanted to prove out the numbers, if I take a look at my 2018 March forecast in January for compensation costs, it equals the same value we had in 2017 actuals. And the same thing for February and March and so on. The forecast model engine of Tagetik also pre-populated the remaining periods within the year, so April through December in this case, to provide some visibility for the forecast for the remainder of the year. And not only that, but since we're talking about rolling forecasts, it also included the outer 3 months of my next year's potential calendar year or budget version, for instance. And the way it populated this 568,000 in March, for instance, is based on that 3-month rolling average that we were just talking about. If I want to even prove out the numbers, this 568,440, what I can do is simply come up with an average of the first 3 months of my actuals just by highlighting, and Tagetik will show me that average of 568,440, the same exact value that we're showing in the March of the outer forecast. So again, just to prove out some of the numbers, but from a pure data collection perspective, we know we can use all the same Tagetik functionality we've seen before. The spreading, the comments, building formulas, etc. So just to give an example a little bit more of some of the capabilities on the reporting side. Last thing I'm going to show really quickly to tie off this high-level Tagetik overview is a quick example of a report in Excel, just because we haven't had a chance to show that yet, but Tagetik does come with the most comprehensive integration to the Microsoft Excel solution. And just by doing an apples-to-apples comparison, what we can do is run that same financial report that we ran on the web. And what I'm going to do is run it directly in Excel. My same New York entity, so just by quickly selecting New York and running it for my 2018 budget, I can go ahead and produce the same exact results that we saw on the web because it is the same report. We build all of these reports once in Excel, and we can run them directly in Excel or directly on the web front end in a zero-footprint environment. And again, just to highlight here, the same functionality is also available on the reporting side of things. So I can interact with my different charts and graphs. I can go ahead and start analyzing some of my operating costs, for instance, or break them down by different quarters. I can take a look at those KPIs. I can start drilling into the details of this North American FTE, for instance, and I can start doing the same analysis, right? So even if I double-click on that 46, what I can start doing is drilling down and break that down by individual entities, for instance, and let me see that 66 breakdown by by individual entities, just like we saw on the web front end. So similar functionality from that perspective. Of course, on the P&L side of things, we can do the same interaction with the charts and the graphs here. So I can start taking a look at total cost of goods sold compared to total SG&A, for instance. I can start pivoting my different reports as well, drilling behind the scenes, drilling into the audit trail, or potentially what I can even do is start drilling into variance, right? Maybe I have a variance of 2.3 million in the software cost of goods sold, and I want to understand which product that's coming from, or maybe which region, for instance. So I can still double-click, and I can start telling the system, hey, let me break down that 3 million in variance by all of my products, and let me pinpoint exactly where the variance between budget to actuals is coming from. And in this case, we see a lot of it's coming from the office automation product line. So again, even access to variance breakdown out of the box in Tagetik with just a couple clicks on the numbers. And just to really prove it out too, even concepts like drill through on the balance sheet side of things, just like we've seen already a few times on the web, is also available directly in Excel with just a couple clicks, and the same information can be available right away in the same exact report. So to quickly recap here, if I jump back to the web front end on our homepage, we've talked a little bit about some of the planning methodologies in Tagetik, like the strategic plan, the annual budget that we build up to those targets coming from the strategic plan, even working on the updated forecast, on the rolling forecast, for instance, and even have a focus beyond just simple P&L planning, really showing the impact on the balance sheet from a working capital perspective, and also the cash flow side of things to really have that 360 360-degree holistic approach to all of my future planning statements. And on the reporting side, we did see just a flavor, right? We didn't go too much into the details, but just to highlight the flexibility of the many different ways of reporting in Tagetik. Whether it's the simple financial reports, the KPIs, the analytical reports, taking a look at dashboards, or even reporting directly in Word or in Microsoft PowerPoint or even in Excel. So hopefully this was a quick and easy to follow 45 minutes or an hour when it comes to some of the generic capabilities of Tagetik's budgeting, planning, and analytics solution. And hopefully that worked out. Thank you very much.